Stop! You're empowering him.
Safeguard us against the evil snares of the devil. Heavenly host, through the power of God, cast me down to hell,
Michael Peterson directs Shadow of God, a 2025 possession movie with a little bit of a twist. This one actually reminds me a mix between The Exorcism of God, which was a possession movie from a couple of years ago, The Prophecy, which is a Christopher Walken movie from the 90s, and a touch of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie. So, what's the story? So it focuses on a priest, and you know, he's sort of somewhat burnt out, and there have been a number of priests that have been killed recently doing exorcisms, and he's kind of ends up running into an old flame who kind of wants to still, you know, get together, but he's, you know, a man of God now, so he can't. And this priest lost his father when he was younger. His father died, but all of a sudden a man looking very much like his father turns up, and may well be like a kind of resurrection, so to speak, and he doesn't know quite what's going on. He presumes it's the work of demons, but it might actually be something else. Could it be the work of God? Could God be channeling himself through the resurrection of his father and want to enter our world, so to speak? He has a sect of religious followers, and it might be that this priest has to turn to the devil for help. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about it. So, there's lots of exorcism and possession movies, and they're somewhat samey, so I kind of like it when a film does something different with this genre. And as I say, you know, I've mentioned The Exorcism of God, which was a similar sort of concept, and then we had The Prophecy, which was you know, sort of divine forces being an antagonist. So it has sort of have elements that have been done before, but nonetheless it's still quite kind of fresh. And this one ultimately, I think, makes for quite a compelling kind of fantasy horror movie in many ways. Certainly a very kind of unique antagonist to a large degree, and this is not a movie without spectacle. You know, there's plenty of light shows and supernatural things that are kind of taking place, and I have to say the moral quandary, so to speak, that this priest faces is quite the conundrum. You know, ultimately it might be God that ends up destroying the earth because he's fed up with humanity, rejecting him and kind of turning to modern society and hedonism and things like this. So it might be up to this priest to really turn his back on what he's been brought up to and actually align himself, at least partially, with the nemesis, the devil, Lucifer. And that can only mean bad news ultimately, but what's a priest to do? So I thought this was some really kind of like neat kind of concepts, and you know, we have our kind of showdown towards the end of the movie, and I genuinely was like, well, how's this going to kind of play out? So I was pretty intrigued, I have to say, and like I said, this movie goes fairly big, and it kind of goes quite sort of a lot of spectacle. So you know, we have this kind of human element where we have this religious sort of cult or sect that are kind of worshippers and of his father when he was alive and stuff, and they're causing problems. Obviously you're trapped, but this priest is trapped between the devil and God ultimately, both who have got their own agendas. I mean, what's a man to do, honestly? So I thought this movie was very, very compelling story-wise in regards to that. I thought the character, I took a while to warm to him, I won't lie, But I think ultimately I found him quite a compelling sort of lead, and his relationship with his kind of female friend. They never are a love interest, but nonetheless, I think they had a good chemistry nonetheless. And the kind of the relationship with his newly resurrected father, and obviously we see flashbacks about how much of a kind of zealot the father was when he was kind of younger. So I found, you know, it's very much, I think, has snippets of real nice kind of characterization. I say snippets because there's one thing I would say. I think this movie lacks a little bit of character development, but we do have snippets where I do think it sort of comes across as pretty strong. You know, and it's the movie has this kind of build to it through the film. So it's one of these films that sort of starts off relatively innocuous. It kind of feels like many other exorcism movies that you've seen plenty of times before, but it has this kind of building storyline and arc where the kind of the stakes are just increasing and increasing, and obviously has this kind of crescendo at the end. So I have to say I thought the pacing of this movie was quite strong. No, it's not a high budget movie, but I do think the VFX were quite interesting, and the movie doesn't kind of scrimp out on showing us the face of God, and it was quite, you know, quite an interesting concept for that, I have to say. I have seen critiques for the acting, but I gotta say I don't think the acting was bad at all. Like I say, I think there's some character work that was maybe could have been a little better, but I think the acting was okay. And the movie's genuinely quite, I wouldn't say scary, but you kind of feel the stakes here. The movie does a good job of selling you on the kind of the enormity of kind of the situation here. Even if you're not a religious, you can just buy into this kind of this world and this concept. There is a sequence which very much will remind you of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's an odd choice. It's kind of fun. I don't know if it was meant to be just a kind of a sly wink and nod to that movie, or if it was sort of unintentionally had just kind of ended up aping it, but it was kind of a fun scene nonetheless. So, you know, I genuinely think this movie was quite a compelling movie, generally quite sort of decent sort of VFX here, sort of quite kind of, you know, a creepy, although not being kind of necessarily scary, where this movie lacks a little bit, I would say, and I've kind of mentioned it, I think the character work here could have been a little better. I feel we didn't really get to know our central characters, and the setup as well is not strong. I mean, I think this movie doesn't start off on the best foot because you really don't feel like this movie sets up what's actually happening particularly well. I feel as the movie progresses and you kind of, you know, get towards the end of this movie, you can kind of understand the status quo and you can kind of get what's going on. But I don't think the movie does the work early on to really set this up and kind of like paint a picture about what's actually kind of going on here. That there's this kind of like potentially kind of, you know, universe-shattering event is going to happen, but it doesn't really sort of set the groundwork, I wouldn't say, in particular. So, you know, there's that. And obviously this is a very much a movie in regards to, has religious overtones, and where our priest ends up kind of, at least partially allying with the devil. Obviously those who have a religious disposition might be somewhat kind of perturbed by that, one would say, but you know, it was an interesting concept, and I actually gotta say I quite enjoyed this kind of like this interesting kind of take on that. I don't know if the ending completely sort of bought, you know, but I don't know if I was completely bought in for the ending. It seems with such an omnipresent power here, it maybe got wrapped up a little bit too easily, I have to say. Overall, though, I did find this a compelling movie. It certainly wasn't perfect, but I actually kind of quite enjoyed it. Definitely a great companion piece with The Exorcism of God. That one was a stronger film, I have to say, but this isn't an above average movie for me. You know, it was a decent watch. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.